introduced, here's the agenda for today. First, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself so you know who I am, why I'm talking to you about this data detox stuff. Next, I thought it would be nice to walk through a couple of case studies from my own research that I think will illustrate how data can be used as an asset, but how it's also, as Monica mentioned, a liability as well, how it's both things. And my motivation from these case studies is to increase our own awareness about the ways in which our data can be used, perhaps in ways that we might not realize on a day-to-day basis, and to use these as a motivation for thinking more critically about how we use digital technologies in our lives, when we use them, the ways when we decide that we want to stay offline or to do something online. This is more about thinking about the role of digital technologies in our own lives and work more holistically. And in that vein, I will just share a couple of places to begin if this seems like something that you're interested in trying out yourself in your personal life or in your organization. So we'll talk about a couple of places to start, some best practices, and then I'll wrap it up with some follow-up resources if you're interested in learning more, where you can go. And we'll have some time at the end for questions. So if that sounds okay, I'll jump straight on in. Hi, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Varoon. I'm kind of stuck between two worlds, I would say, but it's turned out to be quite an interesting place to be. I've spent half of my career in the private tech sector. I was working as doing data science work at Dropbox back in the early-ish days of the company. If you know Dropbox, I was running some data science collaborations at an online radio company called TuneIn, and I currently do some independent consulting for some private tech companies, helping them with things related to statistics and how they use data. And then part of me is also in this public interest technology world. I worked at Tactical Tech for a number of years, where I worked on a team investigating how our personal data is being used for political purposes. I'm an advisor to an organization called the Real Facebook Oversight Board, which is a group of independent scholars and journalists, activists, trying to bring some truly independent commentary to the actions of Meta as a company. And I also advise political candidates who are running for office on how they can build their campaigns, their online campaigns, their digital campaigns in ways that respect our voters' own privacy and security. And most recently, I've also started a master's degree program in information and cybersecurity at the University of California, Berkeley. And I only mention that because one of my big goals from this program and from this next chapter of my professional life is to help civil society organizations, perhaps ones like the ones that you work at, with their own security posture. And that's one of the reasons why I'm eager to learn from all of you today about the kinds of data detox, data-related, security-related questions that you find yourselves facing. And I'm really excited to talk specifically today about data detox because it's, I would say, still quite a niche topic, I guess, if we can pat ourselves on the back and think of it that way, because the reality is that much of the tech ecosystem has been built in a very data hungry kind of way, just trying to collect as much data as we can. And this question of taking a step back, pausing, thinking more critically about this model, it's still not so common. And also the economics of our online privacy and security illustrate this fact. Companies are eager to collect our data, to monetize it, to profit from it. But if they don't take care of the data that we share with them and the data that we trust them with, who actually pays the price? So I'll give you a quick example from my own experience. In 2017, a company called Equifax in the United States, where I'm based in Berlin now, I grew up in the United States, this company Equifax, based in the United States, it's a major consumer credit reporting organization. So this organization had, and probably still has, my name, my address, my birth date, my driver's license number, my social security number, that's like in the United States, your national ID number. They have all of my credit history, a lot of really sensitive information. And in 2017, the company experienced a major data breach. And in the process of conducting these investigations, it was discovered that the password to one of their servers was admin. And I just illustrate this point because here's a company that had the benefit of having all of my data, but in a case in which I see someone posted the funny emoji. I mean, it's really absurd when you think about it. And I like to mention this story because here's a company that reaped all the benefits from collecting my data, but when they did something wrong, who actually paid the price? You know, whose identity was at risk of being stolen after a data breach like this? And anyway, this is just a long way of saying that the opportunity to do things differently lies with us as individuals, because much of the persisting economic model doesn't incentivize a lot of private companies to do the right thing. And so we as individuals have a chance to correct things ourselves, but also as people who work at civil society organizations, we have a chance to do things differently at the organizations we work with differently too. So I hope you find the advice here useful in both your personal and your professional lives. And like I said, the purpose of all of this is trying to be more mindful about what information we share online, how we navigate our relationship with digital technology in a more holistic way. And ultimately, it's really about, I know this might sound kind of, soft and fluffy, but honestly, it's really about living your own values in the digital world. Whatever values you want to live your life by, I believe, people should be able to live in, adhering to those same values in the digital world as well. So, okay, that was enough of an introduction. Like I said, I want to start with sharing some examples of case studies from research my colleagues and I did at Tactical Tech. And the focus of my work there was, and in many ways still is, trying to understand how our personal data is being used for political influence. And I just want to say, I will admit at the outset that some of these case studies and illustrations of technology are, they expose how technology is being used invasively. Some of you might even find it creepy. But my purpose here is not to make you distrusting of digital technology or to make you fear it either. But my goal here is simply to help raise our awareness about how data can be used and how it is being used. And that way we will be better informed about how and when and why we use digital technologies. And I should also just say that some of these examples, not all, but some of them are from the US, but we have seen in recent years how technology developments like these have a way of spreading from the US to many other parts of the world. And so for that reason, even though not all of these examples are from, Eastern Partnership countries, I think they're still worth our time. So I want to just begin with a couple of, let me just go back. These are the topics that we'll just be covering: data as a liability, mobile texting, geo-targeting, third-party tracking, search result influence, and digital listening. And we'll go through examples of each of these. And so I just want to begin with this idea of data as a liability. As Monica said, we are all very accustomed to this idea of data being an asset, right? This now very cliche phrase that data is the new oil. There's a lot of money that one can extract from data, but we're also reaching a point in which organizations, governments are realizing, individuals themselves as well, that data is an asset. Yes, there's a lot of good that data can do for us, but data is also a liability. It's a risk, it's a burden. Having access to data can expose us to things that we don't want to be exposed to. And so just as an example of this, and I showed this same example in my cybersecurity presentation, but there was research that was published earlier this year about an operation that was trying to extract and exfiltrate data from civil society organizations, among others, in Armenia and in Azerbaijan through desktop surveillance. And we all have desktop computers, and the actors behind this exploit were trying to access information at the end of the day, access data by surveilling people through desktop computers. And this report in this investigation found that The threat actors behind the attacks have been targeting human rights organizations, dissidents, and independent media in Azerbaijan, and also more recently against Armenian targets. And that's at the end of the day because these human rights organizations and dissidents and independent media, they had access to information, perhaps on these desktop computers that these attackers wanted access to. And it's a very commonplace example. We all have files and valuable information on our computer, but even something that we might think is totally inert and just sitting there, safe, can't be touched, even this kind of data is a liability of sorts because there are interested actors in accessing it and learning from it and using it to advance whatever agendas they might have. And you can imagine what kind of agendas these attackers had if they are targeting organizations like human rights organizations and dissidents and independent media. This is a map, a kind of heat map. It's kind of a little bit difficult to see, but at the bottom in white text here, it says the number of leaked Duolingo accounts. We learned earlier this year that Duolingo had a big data breach. Perhaps you know the company. It's an app. It's a language learning app. I've used it before. I used it when I was originally preparing to move to Germany, wanted to pick up some German. Perhaps you're trying to learn a new language. It's a really popular app. And this map shows you where leaked Duolingo accounts originated from. And you can see all of the 6 Eastern Partnership countries here. And you can see that, especially more so in Moldova, Belarus, and Ukraine, then Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, there were, more than a small number of accounts that were leaked on Duolingo originating in these countries. And what's interesting is that hackers exposed, as this headline shows, about 2.5 million Duolingo users. And if you read the subtitle here, Duolingo, the popular language learning app, has had some of its users' information exposed online. The scraped data of 2.5 million people, which was on sale in January, is now on the cybercrime marketplace breach forums. So, one of the themes that we see when we think about data being a liability is that there is a black market, there is a gray market for this information. And so there is a digital footprint that we leave behind when using digital technologies of all kinds. And in some cases like this, there's money to be made from collecting this information and making it available.
Arun, if I may just draw your attention to something. So we have a question in the chat from Diana. Why would anyone want our Duolingo account? So I think that's an important question to answer.
Absolutely. So yeah, very good question, Diana. Thank you for asking it. First, there might be sensitive information. Part of this particular leak had information about people's profiles. Not everyone whose data was exposed had their whole profile exposed, but Duolingo, you can set up a profile with usernames, with email addresses, with I don't know if this is the case specifically with Duolingo, but it's not uncommon for many consumer apps where you can confirm a phone number, even upload a profile picture. This is information that someone might want access to if they are trying to learn information about you, even if they're just trying to be opportunistic and say, let me sell this information to someone who might want it. And not to sound too conspiratorial, but to be really honest, because this happens in practice, you can imagine perhaps there's an adversarial government out there who might be interested if, someone in the Ukrainian government is trying to learn another language for Ukraine, for the purposes of Ukrainian national interests or national security, or if, maybe, again, not to sound too conspiratorial, but this stuff happens in practice. Maybe there's a spy in Azerbaijan who has a plan to travel to another country. They're trying to brush up on their language for that destination country. They could be using Duolingo for that purpose. If you are from an adversarial government, you have a keen interest in learning as much as you can about your targets of interest. And so there's one side of it that's kind of just opportunistic, see what you can get. And in some cases, as we see in this case, just sell it for whatever it's worth. In other cases, this kind of attempt to collect this information can be highly targeted. And what I just mentioned about adversarial governments and spies and you can imagine perhaps being able to connect someone's language learning journey to their travel records. And if you believe this is a person of interest in another government, this could be used as a negotiating pawn tactic. It could be a very relevant information, and this stuff does happen in practice. We've seen many examples of it. So it might seem like small and innocuous and kind of unrelated, but yeah, but it happens. A good question, really good question. And I would just say more generally, even outside the scope of Duolingo, as I think some of these other examples will illustrate, the kinds of information that our everyday tech products and services collect, they tend to be really mundane things. But when you think about it, they can actually reveal a lot about us. We'll talk in a second about geolocation history, for example. It might seem a little bit silly. Oh, why is it valuable to know that I go to an organic grocery store and I go to the gym 3 times a week? Well, if there were someone out there interested in learning about you, maybe that says that you are more sympathetic to climate-related issues if you go to an organic grocery store. Maybe that says something about your political beliefs. Maybe that can be used to manipulate you in a particular way. We saw from the Cambridge Analytica investigation that all this information was used to try to learn as much as could be learned about individuals, and then to target them with ads online to try to influence the way people voted. So yeah, it all seems very, very harmless from the outside, but there are ways in which this information can be weaponized. Really good question. Another example of a data breach. This was a story from the end of March 2020. The personal details of the entire country of Georgia were published online. A file containing information on almost 5 million Georgians have been published on a hacker forum at the end of March 2020. It's unknown who posted this and where the data came from. It originally seemed to come from Georgia's Central Election Commission, but later that turned out not to actually be the case. The data that was posted is not actually stored by the Central Election Commission. Experts speculate that the dump was intended to undermine voters' faith in the election that happened in the fall of 2020 in Georgia. And the dump file was created, it was found out, in August 2011. And it wasn't actually published until 2020. And, wherever this data actually came from, I think is another example of the kind of risks of centralization and the way in which just having all this information in one place, of course, can be an asset for, I can imagine, the entity that gathered it for whatever purpose they had. But if that information were ever breached or compromised, as it appears happened here, that information can be a liability as well. And in this case, the consequences can be big. It could be undermining voters' faith in the country's election. So I'll just leave that bit about data as a liability on the side. I just want to talk about another topic of mobile texting. This is basically a trend that we see that I would say in some ways countries like the United States have been slower to adapt to. I think many other countries have been dealing with election campaigning environments that are very busy, very rich with mobile texting. But it's becoming marketed now. It's becoming a service that companies provide. And this is a company called NGP Van in the United States. And you can see here on their website, they have a photo with Obama in the background. And their tagline is "Dial Your Way to Victory, Campaign Phone Tools." And this is about just outreaching through mobile texting and through phone calls. There's this other company here from the company's called CallHub.io. An American company. And in the United States, voters received 2.6 billion political texts in September of 2020. It was a presidential election year in the United States then. And my colleagues and I found that calling and texting is happening in high volumes around election times. That's not surprising, but also that we found an example of a voter suppression campaign that was driven through robocalling in Canada. And at the time, also, we were working with a journalist in Malaysia. And and she got a call from the National Census Department, which was unusual because the National Census Department actually does not exist in Malaysia. There is no such thing. But the caller identified her by name and addressed her in her local dialect and called her, asking her for her voting preferences and why she was voting. And it was unclear who commissioned these calls, where they got their data from, and what they were doing with this data. And I mentioned this because their service is being built around these kinds of efforts, and Call Hub IO is one of them. SMS data collection, use automatic text interactions to to collect contact data from subscribers following SMS opt-in. And maybe I'll just actually let me skip this video for the sake of time. It's a video from the United States from a company that provides texting outreach for political campaigns. But just to say, here are some examples from a friend of mine in Georgia who got tons of unsolicited text messages around the time of the election. She said at the time it was overwhelming, the number of texts that she was getting. And it's totally unclear, how did people get access to her phone number? Who was instructing people to text her? Why exactly were they texting her? What information do they want from her? Perhaps her phone number was obtained through a Duolingo-like data breach. Who knows? But just to say that things that are really that seem really harmless in the service, like giving out our phone number, this is also a kind of liability, and that there are entities out there, sometimes even with explicit political agenda, who are interested in collecting this information. And this is part of a broader theme about how our information, our personal data today, whether or not it's explicitly political or environmental or related to our position on labor rights or human rights, whatever, it's all relevant in this day and age for people who are trying to advance a particular agenda using any means possible. So anyway, this is something that I want to mention, that in this day and age, information on our phone numbers and efforts to call and text us and ways to nudge us, this is alive and well. I want to share this photo from, this is a photo from Los Angeles, from the United States, around the time of the murder of George Floyd, a Black American. And after he was killed by a member of the police force, people all over the United States went out to protest. And this is a photo from a protest that happened in Los Angeles. And the protests were not only in Los Angeles, they were happening in many American cities like Detroit. And this map here shows part of the protest route that protesters had organized in Detroit. And what's very interesting is that there was a political organization that I'll talk about in just a second who geofenced the protest. And a geofence is like a virtual perimeter around a point of interest. It's just like the same technology that Uber uses. If you've ever taken a flight to another city and landed in the airport and received a text message from Uber saying, "Hi, welcome to Berlin," or "Hi, welcome to Chisinau, tap here to call an Uber." It's because Uber has geofenced the airport. It's just putting a virtual fence around a point of interest. They want to send that push notification only to people at the airport and not anyone else. And it's a way of treating people inside of this virtual perimeter differently from the people outside. And what's interesting is that the organization that geofenced this protest in Detroit didn't only geofence the protest in Detroit, they also geofenced the protest in other cities, including Houston, Tallahassee, Florida, Raleigh, North Carolina. These are really important swing states, swing regions, districts in the United States, places that can have a really big impact on national elections. And it turned out that the organization that actually deployed this geofence is a group called Field Team 6. And by deploying this geofence, they were able to harvest the mobile IDs of the protesters who were at the protest during the time the geofence was active. And by harvesting their mobile IDs, they were able to go to Facebook and to target these people with ads, with political ads on Facebook. In this case, they were trying to encourage these people who were at the protest, who were not registered to vote, to actually register to vote. And here's the ad that these people who were at the protest actually saw. Voting out the racist begins with registering to vote. And I mentioned this for a few reasons. Number one, that I think this should surprise all of us, that the idea of being out at a protest and your mobile ID information being collected and used to serve you with a political ad, that is quite shocking, I think. And even if we might feel comfortable with the message that is being delivered in this case, I think it is a reflection of how normalized surveillance is becoming in our everyday lives, and also in our civic life, in our political life. And Field Team 6, by the way, the organization that launched this geofence and that harvested these mobile ads and paid for these ads on Facebook, this is, if you go to the website, this is what it looks like. And so just to be clear, they deployed this geofence. They're able to say, okay, here are the mobile IDs we were able to harvest. We are able to match these mobile IDs to this voter data we have, and we know that these 70% of people, they are already registered to vote. We only want to focus on the 30% of people who are not registered to vote, and using tools available to them on services like Facebook are able to serve those ads only to people who are not registered to vote. And you can see here, they kind of brand themselves as a more progressive outfit, and yet are using tools and techniques that are, I would say, very highly invasive. Okay, now on to another topic of technologies called third-party tracking. I'm going to play a short video from a company explaining how they serve political ads to you on the internet. I hope the sound will work. If it doesn't, just let me know and I can play it from the beginning again.
You have a compelling story to tell.
I think there's an echo. Let me try. Let me just try it again.
Yeah, there is an echo. It sounds weird.
You have a compelling story to tell. But how do you make sure voters hear it?
Still the same issue.
Yeah, I don't know where the echo is coming from. Let me just explain the video in a nutshell. The video, I will just walk through some of the stills. They explain if you want to run a political ad and you want to tell people to vote for a particular party, it's hard to know whom to target your message to. And so this company has something called the political cookie, and they talk about it in a kind of playful and jokey way. It's kind of like like a technical cookie, the kinds of cookies that when you go to a website, it says, do you consent to having cookies placed on your browser? And they talk about this political cookie that they have developed, and they talk about a case in which when you go to a website and you see photos for shoes and cars, and those same ads follow you around the internet, and you're not sure how that works, it turns out that they use a very similar technology for advertising political candidates to you. And so through this technology they've developed, you can see who's a voter in your constituency, who's not in your constituency, and who's not registered to vote. And the purpose of doing all this analysis on voters is to make sure that if you're going to be spending money on running political ads, you don't want to waste your money on the wrong people. You want to make sure that you're targeting the right people. And how do you actually target them? You target them through this online ecosystem of making sure that the digital footprints we all leave behind when we use the internet, that we are collecting this information, using this information, so you're not actually wasting money on advertising to someone who's not registered to vote, or who's not living in your constituency, or importantly, who's not believed to be supporting the candidate that you're trying to support. So anyway, the whole point, and this is all under the guise of saving money as well. And so these digital footprints that we all leave behind when we use the internet, it's not so immediately obvious that these technologies are used to for political purposes the way they are, but they are being used. And there's a lot of, and companies who do this are also making a lot of money from advertising the use of these technologies. I'll just mention, for example, that if you were to go to the Donald J. Trump website or even the Hillary Clinton website, it's not even like in the context of the United States, these are only problems of one side of the political spectrum or the other. These tend to be the case across all ideological spectrum around the world. That if you go to one of these websites, you can see that Google Analytics has a tracking cookie, Facebook has a tracking cookie, Twitter has a tracking cookie. All these digital online advertising ecosystem firms have cookies. And these are these exact same technologies that companies like Facebook use, Google use to service ads all over the internet. And this image here is from a slide deck that was leaked from a company that offers these kinds of services. And it's supposed to be funny. In 1993, this comic says, "On the internet, no one knows you're a dog." But in 2011, when you're on the internet, there's so much that these companies can know about you, that you're living in this district, that you are registered as voting Republican, that you have a high net worth, that you are between the ages of 50 and 54, that you're interested in politics, that you are looking to buy a car. All this information that we leave behind, this is all being collected and used. Okay, just to wrap this section up, also information on what we're looking for. I love this example from a collaborator of ours who was based in Kenya at the time of the Kenyan presidential elections. She was searching for the TV show Scandal on Google, which came up here. But when she searched for Scandal on Google, she was served with a political ad that was paid for by one of the Kenyan presidential candidates who had bid on the word scandal in an effort to scandalize his opponent. So people, when they were searching for information, would be more likely to connect this political opponent with the idea that this opponent was embroiled in a lot of political scandals. Also, if you search for the word for flower in Swahili, unga, there are also political ads being paid for about how the price of corn is going to drop, how the price of flour is going to drop because of the political corruption of this political candidate. And so this attempt to influence when people are looking, voters are searching and looking for information and trying to influence them at a time when they're looking for information, this is also happening. And then there's a broad ecosystem of what I generally call digital listening. This is an infographic from a company based in the Netherlands. There's a lot of information, for example, on platforms like Twitter. There are companies that mine the Twitter pipeline. They analyze what people are saying about political candidates, about political parties, about political issues on Twitter, collecting all this information, analyzing it, using all this natural language processing. You can see here's another company that does something similar in politics. Reputation matters above all, analyzing all kinds of data that people leave behind online to track trends and kind of just take the temperature. This is an image of this political candidate from Taipei named Dr. Ko Wen-je. He was running to be mayor of Taipei, and here's an image that his campaign released of him visiting a tattoo parlor. And what's really interesting is that he is at this parlor not to get a tattoo and not to learn how to give someone a tattoo, but because a political campaigning firm that he was working with provided him with a list of things that he could do, places he could visit that would generate the most buzz online. And at the top of that list was getting a tattoo and playing basketball. And that's why he visited this tattoo parlor. And the company that told him to do that is this company called Autopolitik. They work across Southeast Asia, and their tagline is winning elections with social intelligence. And so I love this example because I think it's not immediately obvious that here's this political candidate at this tattoo parlor because a lot of data that a company collected told him to do that. And of course, there are questions of authenticity and sincerity underlying an image like this. But at the end of the day, data that lots of people left behind unwittingly is being used to inform political decisions like these.
Varoon, I see there is one hand raised. So
yes, please.
if you're okay, Anna, please feel free to take the floor and ask your question, or if you have a comment. Anna, can you hear us? Okay, I see Anna is not. I see Anna is not saying anything. Okay, we have some questions also in the Q&A, but those ones we can leave for a little bit later. Well, Diana is asking, did it help with the topic? Did he get more votes?
Yeah, it's Dana, I'm really happy that you asked. I do believe he was elected, I'm quite sure. But it raises a really good question. You know, I sometimes feel even if he had not been elected, in fact, in my mind, the argument is even stronger if he hadn't been elected. What does it mean that he's using these techniques at all to begin with? You know, whether or not they work, what does it say about his intentions? What does it say about what he is willing to do and what he's willing not to do to get power, essentially, at the end of the day? And so with a lot of these technologies, I feel some of these technologies are more evidence-based and work, to be blunt. Some, the evidence is more mixed and it's unclear whether they actually work. But for me, it's always a question of what does the use of these technologies reveal about the people using them? What does it say about their intentions? What does it say about what they consider fair game and what's not fair game? And also, just in the context of politics, let me just say that one of the things that we see nowadays is the use of technology in politics. It really changes the ball game when it comes to acquiring power and holding on to power. If you are a politician in power, it's very easy now to use all the data available to you from the government to make sure that you stay in power. And it's easy to exploit that position and to make sure that no one else can come into power. So the politics of acquiring and maintaining power are really being changed by all these digital technologies and the data that these digital technologies enable. I also just saw another question I want to answer that I think is a really good question from an anonymous poster asking, is incognito browser data being used? So one really interesting point on incognito browsers stop the data from being saved locally on your computer, but they do not prevent the data from being collected by the company itself. So let's say, for example, I'm using Google Chrome as my internet browser. I can open up an incognito browser and search for, I don't know, a questionable rash that I got on my arm. Maybe something a bit more sensitive, maybe something a bit more personal, something that I don't want just living around on my internet history on my computer. An incognito browser will accomplish that task of preventing that search query from being on my machine. It does not, however, stop Google from collecting information about the fact that I searched that to begin with. That information is still being collected by the company itself. And it's actually even been shown in some cases that the information that people search through incognito browsers are also, if you've ever found yourself like typing something into a search engine and then erasing it and going back, there's been research showing that that thing that you typed originally is actually more valuable for the sake of these companies trying to understand what it is that you want. Even though you might not have hit enter or might not have hit search and hit submit, that record of the fact that you typed this into the search box, that is still stored. And I think it's a really good question because I think that's not so immediately obvious. And also really surprised me when I first learned about this, that your incognito browsing history is still being collected. It's just not on your machine. And even information that you type but don't hit submit, that's also collected as well. And in many cases, because it reveals something about our desire to hide what it is we're searching for, whether we just type something in Eraser or whether we open incognito browser, it ends up being more useful in a way, more illustrative, more telling about what it is that we are looking for, especially when it's these things of more sensitive nature that we're likely to type in a race or likely to open an incognito browser for. Good question. So we just take a step back from thinking about some of these examples I just mentioned and just reflecting on digital technologies and digital interventions more broadly. Digital technologies are great, and I don't want to cast them in a negative light blindly. They are convenient, they are efficient, they make us globally connected. We're all connecting here from different parts of the world. That is a massive asset. They give us access to information. We can learn through the information that we collect. They can help us save money. They can help us automate things that are boring and time-consuming and tedious for us to do. They can help personalize our services, which can be very convenient for us. They are very useful for questions of accessibility and impact. We can have broad, far-ranging global impact through digital technologies. But if we also take a step back to think about some of the aspects of digital technologies that we might not feel as comfortable with, as we talked about, there are security risks from the data we collect and leave behind when using digital technologies. There is the digital divide, of course, of some communities, some parts of the world being left behind by the digital divide. If the term digital divide is not clear, it's basically just this idea that some communities, countries, economies are progressing, leveraging all of the benefits of digital technologies, and some are being left behind. And that's what we generally refer to when we talk about this digital divide. There's obviously the risk of job displacement and unemployment as a result of automation from digital technologies, privacy concerns, the information that we entrust to the technologies we use. Of course, there are questions of addiction and dependency. I think we all know people, perhaps we ourselves have found ourselves addicted to digital technologies. There's digital fatigue. I think we've all, having gone through the pandemic, have experienced this firsthand of just feeling like I've just spent my whole day on a computer. It's exhausting. Of course, there's varying quality of information. In a day and age in which we have access to so much information, we cannot trust that all of it is fact-checked and reliable and trustworthy. There are a lot of environmental impacts from digital technologies. This goes from anything from the mining of rare earth minerals to manufacture our physical devices like our phones, to the environmental impacts of server farms and cooling digital big server farms that they don't overheat. There are a lot of environmental impacts from our digital technologies, the kind of social isolation that they can foster, perhaps connected to issues of addiction. And also the fact that digital technologies are so frequently changing that it can be exhausting to keep up with everything. So I don't want to cast digital technologies in a one-sided light, but it's all of these things at once. They are good and they're bad. They make our lives convenient and they complicate our lives. They solve problems and they create other problems. And I think these are all worth acknowledging when thinking about a topic like digital detox. Also, I should say that your motivation for thinking more critically about your digital footprint, about how you use data and digital technologies in your lives, there can be a lot of reasons why you might care about this. Perhaps you want to work around the restrictions of a government that a government is placing on you. Maybe your adversary is a private company, or maybe generally the problem of surveillance capitalism, that this is something that you want to circumvent in your own personal or professional life. Maybe, there have been many cases of this, people having controlling partners, abusive partners who are trying to control not only their physical life, but their digital life as well. Maybe you just care about promoting online privacy and digital wellness in your life. Maybe you want to avoid ads online. Maybe you don't want to be manipulated as a voter. Whatever your motivation is, there are a lot of different reasons as to why you might care about this topic, and they're all completely valid. I just want to say that that yeah, your particular motivation doesn't have to be the same as everyone else's. It can be specific to you. And they are all completely legitimate motivations for trying to think about data detox and also thinking about how you can live a more data lean kind of life. And there are a lot of benefits to doing it, whether your motivation is to subvert surveillance capitalism or exercise digital autonomy because of a controlling partner, or whether you're trying to access independent information in the context of a government that's trying to restrict your access to that information, whatever it is. There are a lot of benefits to being data lean in all of these cases. And I want to walk through some of those benefits now. First, there's money to be saved. And I mean that really seriously. As an organization, perhaps you decide that you don't need to continue paying so much for maintaining old or historical data. So you introduce a process of purging archived information. This could be true whether the information we're talking about is digital or whether it's physical. Maybe you're paying for a storage space, or maybe you just have, shelves and shelves of binders with old information that you don't need anymore. You can save time. You could save money from just archiving this or getting rid of it or purging it. As an individual, maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here. Maybe you decide to quit your Spotify subscription and stop one private company from collecting personal information about you and running analytics about what mood you might be in when it's raining in your city, when you're listening to a particular playlist. I have a playlist I listen to when I'm feeling kind of down and it's raining in Berlin. Maybe I want to stop that and save money on my Spotify subscription and listen to records instead. There is legitimate cost savings to be had. Also, there's a benefit from faster decision making. With less information to retrieve and to review and to analyze, you can facilitate a smoother and faster decision making process. There's also an opportunity for improved data quality. If you are more selective about the data you collect, you can ensure that the data that you do actually collect is reliable, that is trustworthy, and that it meets your needs. Let's say, for example, that you as an organization, as a lot of civil society organizations do, collect information on donors to your organization. Some of this information could be really old. Let's say you decide to revisit it, refresh it, remove old contacts, and focus on making sure that the information that you have from the last 3 years is really up to date, that the phone numbers you have are valid, the email addresses you have are actually not spam. Making sure that information is up to date, you can really improve your overall data quality by choosing to be more data lean. It can also simplify your governance needs. With fewer data-related concerns to manage, you have less to worry about. If you're more selective about the information you collect, there are also fewer compliance-related matters that you might have to deal with. It's better for security. If you're more selective about the information you share with other organizations, with other private companies, the chance that your data could end up in a breach or a leak or a hack is also reduced. And it works the other way as well. If you are more selective about the data that you collect as an organization, if, God forbid, your organization were to suffer a data breach or a leak or a hack, that means that the number of affected people could be smaller, or the extent of the information that your data breach that you suffer from compromises, it's reduced. So let's say maybe today you collect a lot of information that could be seen as invasive. If you go through a process of trying to be more data lean and examining the information you really collect and really say, we don't need to be collecting this information, we can get rid of it. If in the future you were to suffer a data breach, hopefully that never happens, but if it were to happen, perhaps the information that's exposed could be of less consequence. And finally, I think that this is probably the biggest reason. Being data lean, I think, frees you to focus on your core goals. Your organizations are doing so many important things, working on human rights, you're working on independent media, environmental issues, labor rights, what have you. You probably don't want to be worrying about your digital footprint and compliance-related data concerns. You have bigger problems to worry about. And I think being data lean simplifies your life to shift your focus from these administrative concerns to investing more of your time and energy on the issues and causes you really care about. All right, so we've talked about how digital technologies might be disrespecting your online privacy and security, and you want to be data lean. How can you actually do it? There's no one size fits all solution, and what's right for me might not be right for you. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you don't use Instagram, stop using Gmail, but there are some places that you can start. And I wanted to share some of those places with you. One very basic place is that a lot of our devices have names attached to them. When I first discovered this and went through it, I realized that my iPhone, when I first set up my iPhone, was called Varoon Bashyakarla's iPhone. And that meant that if I were ever, like on a bus, around a Wi-Fi network, even my Wi-Fi network had information about my apartment, that information was being broadcasted. I don't go to a cafe or an airport or a restaurant and say, my name is Varoon, here I am. But that is kind of what our devices are doing. And so one very simple thing that you can do is to just update your device name, and here instructions if you're on an Android device or an iOS device, how you can change the name of your device to something that's less revealing of your identity. You can also make sure that your devices are exposing only the location information that you want. So you can disable location services, whether you're on an iOS or Android altogether. And there's steps that you can take to make sure that you're only sharing location services with the services that you want. I guarantee you there's probably an app on your phone that's using your location that you don't realize. Just going through all of these apps on your phone, doing a light audit can help you spot these and make you more data lean in the process by actually using some of these controls that are available but that a lot of us don't take the time to actually use, and these can really pay dividends for our digital wellness. Also, notifications. We get notifications all the time on our devices. We can be more intentional about a relationship with these technologies by deciding what really is worth capturing our attention in the moment. And so modifying our settings with notifications can be a step in that direction. And even disabling some notifications altogether. On Android, for example, here are steps you can take to disable your phone screen lighting up when new notifications arrive. One thing that I have admittedly never done, but will do at some point in the future, is to set your phone in gray mode, in grayscale and monochrome. If this has been shown to help with people who are suffering from phone-related addiction, all of the addictive qualities that are engineered into these apps can be kind of reversed, or at least toned down, no pun intended, by putting our phones in black and white. And also, if you have a messaging service that you like to use, like Telegram or Signal, there are burn-on-read timers that you can use. So you're not storing on your phone the entirety of your digital archived history conversation with someone, but only the last week or the last day or the last hour. And you can burn messages upon read to keep you more data lean. Like I said, go through and do an audit of your apps, identify passwords that you reuse. One of the best things that I can recommend doing is to use a password manager. These services require you to remember only one password, and they will help you generate highly secure, highly random passwords for all your other products and services. And I, once a year, go through and just make sure that I'm not reusing the same password for any two services. And this is how a lot of data breaches actually work. Service A has a data breach, and because people are using the same password for service A and service B, C, and D, hackers or attackers are able to access their information in other accounts. You can imagine maybe there are people who, use the same password for their Duolingo account as they use for their LinkedIn. Who knows? Multiple services can be compromised by reusing passwords. So a password manager will help streamline these needs for you and can simplify things tremendously. I will go through these very quickly because I mentioned these in my cybersecurity presentation. So I suspect a number of you have seen these already, but there's this framework that I call Fork with a C, and it's about fortifying, obfuscating, reducing, and compartmentalizing our digital lives. Like I said, I'll just go through this quickly. The recording from the cybersecurity webinars online if you want to go through it in a bit more detail. But there are some basic steps we can use to make us more data lean in our everyday lives. And one is to fortify our online presence by using, for example, an email provider that's end-to-end encrypted, or by password protecting sensitive documents and files, by making sure that we are not joining just public Wi-Fi networks, but Wi-Fi networks that are password protected. And if you're in a place that allows it, using a VPN to mask your internet traffic. One of the benefits of using an email service that provides end-to-end encryption is that only you and your recipient can read the messages you exchange. Otherwise, sending email communications is kind of like sending a postcard. And this is not specific to email, by the way. This is also true, I don't know, for SMS, for Telegram. You can just send messages to people without using end-to-end encryption, but apps like Telegram, Signal as well. iMessage will do this. They will end-to-end encrypt your messages, so no one who might be monitoring traffic on the network can read the messages that you're exchanging with other people. You can obfuscate your digital footprints by using disposable email addresses, using DuckDuckGo or Tor browser. Brave browser is another one. I use Firefox personally. That's as my go-to browser. You can reduce your digital footprint. Once in a while, leave your phone at home when you go out. I know that might sound like an outlandish idea, but it's a totally valid one. Limit your social media use or your social media permissions. Use nicknames and pseudonyms. Opt for open source solutions when possible. You can also compartmentalize. Oh, this is, I was just going to say, this is a, if you happen to be on an iPhone, I don't know how many of our participants are on iPhones versus Androids, but if you go to your settings and go to privacy, and you can go to location services, and you can see frequent locations that are on your phone. This is an example of someone who posted theirs online. You could see they visited home 59 times. They visited their work with the actual timestamps when they were. This is all encrypted and it's only on your device. Apple does not have access to this information, but if someone were to gain access to your device, they would have access to this information. You can just delete this information on your phone if you want, and just reduce your own digital footprint and be more data lean in the process. You can also compartmentalize your digital life. Maybe you use one internet browser when you're at work and another one when you're at home. I think it's important to just mention a few things about social media. First of all, I think it's totally legitimate as an organization, as an individual, to regularly revisit your decision to even be on these platforms. We've seen recently a lot of organizations leaving Twitter, leaving X. Facebook has also recently rolled out a new model where you can either pay to be on the platform or continue to be on the platform, but have ads shown to you. So this might not be up to date in your region. Not all of these changes are rolled out globally all at once, so I've kept these here, but you can update your ad preferences. You can see how these companies understand your own preferences, their own understanding of what they think you are interested in, and adjust your settings accordingly with the instructions here. Minimize the amount of publicly available data that you share through these services. One of the things I highly recommend in an effort to be more data lean is to just conduct an inventory of all of your assets, all the hardware, software, network assets, cloud assets, list of endpoints, like devices belonging to people in your organization that have to do with or that are storing information about what your organization does. Doing an inventory of data that your organization holds, third-party relationships, if you were to ever experience a data breach, this is one of the first things that you would do just to get a bird's eye view of all the information your organization is connected to. Finally, I will just end with these points on data hygiene. There are a lot of things that you can do, starting with taking an inventory, establishing data retention policies. Maybe you decide, okay, we'll hold on to some set of data for 1 year, then we'll delete it. Trying to be really transparent with your stakeholders about when you collect data. Trying to just limit when you collect data in the first place, implement security measures, maybe opt for end-to-end encrypted email services. If someone were to come to your company or organization and say, I want you to delete all the information that you have on me, that should be an easy process. And your organization should be able to honor a process like that without it being too difficult, without it being too onerous. And policies like GDPR actually mandate that users have the ability to submit deletion requests. Also, I would recommend that you spot check some of your data for reliability. If you are holding a set body of data, just checking, is this email address valid? Is this phone number valid? Is this person's name valid? It can be a way of thinking about whether you need to be collecting all the information you collect and trying to be more selective about what you store at the end of the day. And also having some internal trainings about these topics related to digital awareness and literacy about how our information can be used. With that, I just want to mention some follow-up resources. One is the Data Detox Kit released by Mozilla and Tactile Tech. I can highly recommend it. It's a really great introduction to thinking about your online life and living your values in the digital sphere. It's available in tons of different languages, as you can see here, not just English. If you're interested in learning more about the ways in which personal data is being used for political purposes, my colleagues and I released a report, Personal Data, Political Persuasion, you can find just by a quick search online. And some organizations to follow, Tactile Tech, where I used to work, I can totally recommend EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit based in the United States that follows a lot of digital rights issues. Can totally recommend following the EFF. Also podcasts, if that's more of your thing, from Mozilla, IRL, Online Life is Real Life, if you're interested in learning more about these topics. Also, I just want to say that I mentioned this at the end of my cybersecurity webinar, but it's worth mentioning here that Proton Mail is a company I entrust with a lot of my digital needs. This is not a paid sponsorship. I'm not paid or sponsored by them by any means, but it's a company that I think is really great. They're really prioritizing privacy and security. And they have a 50% discount for nonprofits. And so if that's something that your organization is interested in using, could be worth considering. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. And I know we started a little bit late, so I'm happy to, Monica, if there's capacity, I'm happy to stay on for an additional about 5-10 minutes. If people have questions.
Great. We still have 2 questions in the Q&A. One of them, I think you addressed also during the cybersecurity webinar on the 2-factor authentication, if it actually helps, or is it giving us, or is it giving the platform even more of our data as our phone numbers or extra emails? So this is from Diana on the 2-factor authentication.
Yes. I would say, generally speaking, 2-factor authentication helps. I would absolutely enable it every opportunity you can. What's really great about 2-factor authentication, especially, there are a couple of different ways to do it. One is a lot of services will give you the option to have a text message, like an SMS, sent to your phone with a code every time you're trying to log in. There's another way to do it that many services offer, which is to do it through an app. And that's the way I would recommend doing it. And these apps, like one of the apps, for example, is called Google Authenticator. It runs locally on your device. It will give you a code, like a 6-digit code that changes every minute. And you are not exposing yourself to risks from the company in the process. It's a really good, reliable way of making you more secure online. So I would totally recommend it. The one caveat I will say when it comes to multi-factor authentication is things can be tricky if you lose your phone. So when you set up multi-factor authentication, a lot of services will give you the option of having backup codes available. And I would make sure that you generate those backup codes and you store them somewhere safe. I have my backup codes, for example, in my password manager. I know I'll always be able to access my password manager. And if I lose my phone and can't access the service, I can have a backup code available to me. So just to summarize, yes, highly recommend enabling multi-factor authentication. Preferably do it with the codes generated in an app instead of SMS. Also generate backup codes. So if you ever lose your phone, you don't find yourself stuck out in a difficult place.
Yeah, I think we have still 2 questions remaining in the Q&A. One that, yeah, I'll leave it up to you how you want to address that one. That's actually relating to Dropbox as well. From Konstantin, I don't know if you've seen that. So please tell us how our data is stored how the data stored in the cloud is used for other purposes, such as developing AI products. For example, does Dropbox use our data to develop AI products, or is Google Photos doing that?
Yes, I would generally say, obviously, always depends on the product in question, and the best place to find the answer is their privacy policy. It's never fun to read, but in general, speaking at a high level here, almost all of these online products and services are using this data. They are using this data to refine their services. They're using this data to improve their AI models. It's one of the reasons why I think that if you want to avoid that, storing your information in vaults, in clouds, where it's stored in an end-to-end encrypted fashion that's maybe password protected by you, it's always preferable. And it's what I do as well. And I not to say that just because I do it that you should do it too, but yeah, I think most products and services out there are using the data that we share with it to refine their services. And it's one of the reasons why, like I just mentioned, I entrust a lot of my own online assets to Proton Mail. Their policies are generally much more respective of user privacy.
I think there's oh, sorry, go ahead, Varoon.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I was just looking at this next question, and just to wrap up my thought for that last question, I think just to finish, just a thought that I had, I think, part of being data lean and more intentional about our digital lives is not just using the quickest, most convenient, fastest solution out there. There are benefits to convenience, and I will never deny that. And I don't think it's wrong to use Google Photos, because a lot of the times it just works easily. It's what we need. It can help in a pinch. But depending on your particular needs, it might not always be the best solution. And so I think just building that habit of saying, does this really make sense for what I need and what I want? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What are the costs? Building that muscle when it comes to making decisions in our online lives is a really good thing to do. Okay, what are your thoughts on the social dilemma on Netflix? And what are your thoughts on Netflix and what they do with our data? Dana, it's a really good question. So I think that, by the way, the social dilemma, I should say, they featured the Data Detox kit on their website, on their learning more section. So I have to give them a shout out for that, having played a very small role in helping shape the Data Detox kit. It was really nice to see that they were interested in promoting it. And so my thoughts on the social dilemma and Netflix, I think films like The Social Dilemma are really good entry points for everyday people who are new to thinking about these issues. I think they're inviting, they're good introductions. However, as someone who's been focused on these issues for the last several years, I also have to say that I think there's something ironic and regrettable about the fact that films like these are being released on services like Netflix. Netflix, like all other, tech platforms and services, are working in a very data hungry way. They are, of course, running all kinds of analytics about our usage. Netflix also, Netflix has done research itself on user behavior, from how long your mouse hovers over a preview of a movie, even if you don't click it. These things that we don't even realize are being used. Services like Netflix collect this information. They are running all these analytics to keep us on the screen for as long as possible, to keep us engaged, keep us watching movies, to make money. And of course, they are a private company. That's what we should expect them to do. But the only thing I'll say is that, as I was trying to make the point with some of the case studies earlier, these things work through mechanisms that are highly invasive that we might not realize. I was joking earlier about Spotify running analytics about usage when it rains and what we listen to. Netflix, I'm sure, is doing the same thing. They know a Friday night in your city, if it's raining, they're going to see a, I don't know, X% increase in hours watched because of the rain on a Friday night in your city. So yeah, the film is a great introduction. I think there's something kind of regrettable about the fact that it's being released on platforms like Netflix that are, at the end of the day, I think, guilty of a lot of the practices that a film like Social Dilemma are trying to call out. And in fact, I will just say, having worked with some filmmakers in the past, who, The Great Hack, for example, is another documentary on Netflix that's kind of more critical of technology in our lives. Private companies like Netflix are very clear that there are some lines that cannot be crossed if they're going to be films released on Netflix. So there are some things that cannot be said because these films are being released on these platforms. So it's good and it's bad.
Thank you very much, Varoon. I think I'll stop the recording.